and welcome to another episode of PDA Dad UK. In this episode I want to look at the topic of interoception. Interoception is probably not so well known, but you'll have heard of sensory processing disorder, and interoception relates directly to sensory processing disorder in many ways. And it's something that affects the lives of many people, especially those people who are autistic or who are diagnosed with sensory processing disorder or any of the comorbid diagnoses that go along with those things. So I want to have a look at what interoception is, try and explain it, how our body works with the senses, and what that means for our kids who struggle with this stuff, and how we can help them to not necessarily overcome these things, but to live with them and work with them and communicate with us so that they know where they're at and the discomforts and the challenges they're facing. So let's have a look at what interoception is. So what is interoception? Basically, there's a common belief that we have five senses: sight, sound, taste, touch, smell. And within those five senses, that's what we process our everyday world around us in. We know how something tastes. We often know something's dangerous because we interpret that taste as being bad, and so our body rejects it. We know if something smells, there's a gas leak, we can smell it. If, all these different things, we can see when there's danger coming. All these different things, and we can process. But there are actually three other senses that aren't very well known and not very well talked about, in my opinion. And they are proprioception, vestibular sense, and also interoception. So our vestibular sense is to do with the ear and how we process ourselves spatially around us. You'll notice if somebody has hearing loss or if they've got an ear infection, they're often unbalanced. And might trip over, appear to be clumsy. That's actually to do with the vestibular sense being inhibited. With proprioception, it's kind of similar. It's to do with our knowledge of our space and awareness around us. There are actually sensors in our joints, in our skin, in our muscles that let our brain know what our body's doing. So if I was to lift my hand like this, my brain is receiving information from my skin, my muscles, my joints, telling me that that's what my hand's doing, and then I can interact and move it, so it's a two-way communication almost. Interoception is very, very similar to proprioception, except that it's more inward. What I mean by that is it's not just our skin and our joints and muscles that have these receptors, they're actually in our organs as well. So I know I need to go to the loo because there are receptors and sensors in my bladder that tell me that my bladder is getting full and I need to go to the loo. And I can judge from the information I'm getting how badly I need to go. So it might be I'm going to need to go in the next half hour. I might need to find a service station if I'm driving the car. It might be you need to go right now. You need to pull over and just find a convenient spot that you can hide and have a wee at the side of the road. That's the difference. My brain is able to process what's going on around me, what is going on in my body, and adapt. For people who have sensory processing disorder, this all gets jumbled up, and it's very much a part of autism. We talked in a lot of episodes about how the autistic brain just works differently. And there's a misconception that it's broken, and I don't believe that's the case. It's actually just a different way of looking at things in many ways, and there's a lot of real positives that come from that. I had the joy of speaking with Sophie Lavender on my other channel, The Grumpy Dads I do with Chris. And she was talking about the fact that as a comedian, it really helps her to take a different perspective because she just does that naturally with her autistic brain. It just looks at the world in a slightly different way, and that provides humour. It just forces us to look at the world differently through somebody else's eyes. That's autism in a nutshell to me. When you've got things like sensory processing disorder, it's basically that the brain not necessarily misinterprets. It can misinterpret, but it can also just over-exaggerate or under-exaggerate the senses that we're getting. So my daughter's a prime example of this. She goes to the loo a lot. When we're settling her at night, she will go 5, 6, 7 times. And prior to this, we used to have real issues with bedwetting. So actually part of the solution to her bedwetting was actually that she now goes to the loo more often. She just gets up and goes to the loo, and she'll do it, as I say, 5, 6, 7, 8 times in a night. Especially when we're settling her. Now the problem with that is that she finds the sensation of needing to go to the loo really overwhelming. It was underwhelming before. Her brain wasn't processing it properly, and that's why we were getting the issue with wet beds. She didn't recognize that she needed to go to the loo. Her brain's kind of overcompensated for that. So now the second that there's a need, it's an instant discomfort that's over interpreted by the brain, and she needs to go immediately. She can't hold on for any particular length of time. This is very challenging on car journeys when you've literally just left a rest stop and it's like, I need to go to the loo again. Oh, the frustration, and everything takes about 10 times as long to get anywhere because we're constantly having to pull over and go to service stations and use the amenities. But that's just the way my daughter is, and it's something that we work with, and we one of the things we love about her is what makes her who she is. So that's basically what interoception is. It's the internal signals our body gives that let us know when we need to eat, sleep, go to the loo, when we know something's too hot, we know that we're cold, we need to put on more clothes or put a heater on. It's our body's sense of regulation for our well-being and our needs. So for many autistic people, it doesn't just stop at those bodily function type things. Interoception can leak over into our emotions and how we interpret our emotions. One of the things with my daughter is that she finds it very hard to judge facial expressions and understand what someone is feeling, and that comes from her own lack of ability to interpret her own emotions. And this is why many autistic kids especially, but autistic people in general, will go into meltdown. There's an overwhelm of emotion, and we've talked about in previous episodes the intrinsic link there is between anxiety and autism. And basically a lot of autistic behaviours come about because there's this overwhelming anxiety, and it's how the brain is processing that anxiety and how it's letting it out. Because interoceptive issues cause a problem with interpreting those emotions, that's what can lead to these meltdowns as well. It's basically not being able to understand that I'm uncomfortable in this situation. It's something that builds until they can't process it anymore, and that leads to a meltdown or a shutdown, which we've also talked about in previous episodes, where the body is basically an internal meltdown. So basically the body has a physical reaction to the emotion and the stress that's around them. And they get to that point essentially because their brain isn't processing in the same way that it does for myself the signals that I'm getting from my emotions. Another example of this is fear. Now, we may find that a lot of autistic people, autistic kids especially, I think, will have irrational fears. My daughter really is terrified of wardrobes. We've tried a couple of times to keep a wardrobe in her room, and it leads to sleepless nights. The anxiety that it creates for her is just overwhelming. Likewise, my daughter often shows a complete lack of fear. I talked before about how my daughter was a runner. And thankfully it's something that she doesn't do quite so often now, but especially when she started school at around that age, 3, 4, 5, she used to just run. And I mean, she'd run. And she'd run in front of cars, she'd go to the edge of a cliff if there was an option to do so. She had no sense of the danger that was around her. So interoception helps us to process these dangers, and fear is obviously an emotion. We've talked about how interoception affects emotions. It's the same with fear. So basically for me, when I get to the edge, I'm not great when I'm on the edge of a precipice or anything like that. If I'm looking down, it's not good. I don't like heights. For my daughter, that sense of danger isn't present. And it's something that's got better over time, interestingly enough. And I think that's just as she's learnt to process some of her emotions more effectively, that's come about. But she still definitely has a lack of fear. She'd talk to anybody, and that's something that we're hyper aware of. Things like, if she's putting herself in danger, she doesn't process it effectively. We often have to prevent her from doing things that are going to harm herself, simply because she doesn't have that fear or that understanding that this is a dangerous situation. And I think all kids have this to a degree. We all teach our kids not to touch the fire, don't put your hand on the kettle. When I was a kid, I tried to sniff the kettle. I got a very funny photo of me and my brother where he cut his hair and he had this moon shave, and I had this huge welt on my nose where I'd sniff the kettle, and we're both in this school photo. I'll try and dig it out and put it on because it's hilarious. It seems to be the photo that haunts me for my life. Something that all kids do, because you learn a sense of danger as you go on, and we pick it up from those around us as well, and the teachings that parents pass on to their kids and others as well. That's part of the emotional dysregulation that goes on. So the sensory processing disorder just doesn't allow the sense of fear to be processed effectively. So for people with sensory processing disorder and autistic people as well, the way interoception can affect them can happen in a couple of ways. One is that they can overreact to a situation or to a signal that the body is sending. So hunger is a really good example. When I'm hungry, my body, obviously I'm hungry a lot, my body sends information to my brain that says I need food, and I get the hunger pang. Over responding to that would mean that I eat too much. Now, if a hunger pang is an unpleasant sensation, and it can be, basically for an autistic child or an autistic person or a person with sensory processing disorder, they may overeat to compensate for that or continually eat. So my daughter grazes. It's a really good example of it. She constantly is eating something. She's always got something with her. She has to take food up to bed with her so that she wakes up in the night, she can have a quick munch on something because she needs to allay that hunger pang. It's an unpleasant sensation and she overreacts to it. And you can find that a lot of kids will overeat, which can obviously lead to other issues down the track, and it's something that we have to be very mindful of. But for my daughter, that hunger sensation is too strong, and she needs to allay it quickly, and she'll actually subconsciously prepare for it. So she'll eat even when she's not hungry on the basis that her brain doesn't want to experience the next hunger pang. So it's overcompensating. This can happen with, as we talked about already, like things like going to the toilet. She doesn't like the sensation of needing to go for a wee. The second the sensation hits, she'll respond and she'll go to the loo. It gets her into trouble at school, and it's something we're trying to deal with and process at the moment. But it can be a real challenge for her, and it can be a real challenge for many kids. And we see this in many different ways. It can be drinking as well. You know, anything that your body is telling you need to do something, and it's an unpleasant sensation when it's interpreted by the brain, will lead to an overcompensation. And that's what we see here. Likewise, there can be an under response to it, an inactivity to something. So if a hunger pang isn't being processed properly, then many kids just won't eat. So you'll find a lot of issues with kids who just aren't eating enough because the brain isn't interpreting the signal from the body in the right way. It's not saying you need to eat now. And so the response is just not to eat. I don't feel hungry, I'm not eating. It's just not something that's occurring to them that they need to eat. And it can be something that we have to step in and say, you need to eat now. Not a problem that we faced at this stage, but it does trick over into other areas of sensory input, which is more the proprioceptive and things like taste and texture and touch. Because if certain foods have certain textures and tastes and they don't like it, even though it might be a good thing for them, or they might like the flavour but not the texture, they'll just simply refuse it, which is why you often see many autistic kids have a very limited diet because of these factors coming into play. Another example of this would be potentially wetting themselves. Basically, if the brain isn't interpreting I need to wee right now in the right way, then it just gets ignored, and especially if someone's distracted. So funnily enough, we've had issues with this with my boy. My boy's neurotypical. He doesn't have the same brain function as my daughter. It's just slightly different. But if he's absorbed in a game, if he's playing Roblox or Minecraft on his tablet, and we've seen it a couple of times, he ignores the sensation to need to wee until it's just too much and he wets himself. And that can happen quite frequently with autistic kids and people with SPD because they're not receiving that signal from the brain. And as you get older, it's something you learn to work through, and so maybe you just have regular times that you just try to go to the loo. Maybe that's what needs to be introduced for your kids. You want to have a go for the wee, then you can do this. There are ways to work around it, but basically that's this interoception, the body misinterpreting the information that's coming and not paying it the due attention that you or I would. So what can you do if your child is experiencing issues with interoception and it's related to their autism or their sensory processing disorder? There are a number of techniques which you can use. It's still a very little understood area of the body. And there's a lot of research going on at the present time. But one thing that has been learned is that apparently mindfulness can be a very useful tool, simply because it stops you and you are back in touch with your body. And there are a lot of apps and there's videos on YouTube that you can use which just help you get your body into a state of mindfulness. It can be a very useful thing for people who are struggling with these issues. Another one is a sensory diet. So actually looking at something which is going to provide foods that are going to work for your child and they're going to eat more healthily in that response, basically to overcome the issues with either overreacting to hunger pangs, eating too much, or underreacting and obviously not eating enough. Of course, the next big thing you can do is arm yourself with knowledge. There's actually a lot of information out there on sensory processing disorders and how they affect our kids' lives, and there's a lot of research you can do. There's also a lot of myths out there, and it's really worth going through, having a look for the myths and dispelling them before they even arise as issues. One such myth would be that a lot of people don't believe that these things are real and it's just kids being difficult. We know differently, but educating other people about that can be a real challenge. So being able to know about these perceptions and these myths before they're even in your life can be a real advantage, because when somebody does come up with it, you've got the answer right there. Actually, no, it's to do with this, as I explained. It's interoception, it's to do with, and that relates to all the different aspects of sensory processing disorder. And as I say, in future episodes, we will look at the others as well. But arming yourself with knowledge is really useful. Actually speaking to people who are autistic or have sensory processing disorder, reading articles. There's lots of YouTube channels available which have got actually autistic people talking about their issues with these things. Agony Auti is one I highly recommend. She's fantastic. She really explains things in a very clear way. Do your research, get to know about it, because the more you know, the more you're going to be able to help and support your child. Another really good thing to do is actually look at triggers. Often these things come from maybe an overload of anxiety that's already there. Kids with autism tend to live with a high level of anxiety. It sort of bubbles away beneath the surface. It's not always visible until there's an overload, and that's when we get the meltdowns. Looking for triggers that cause these things, and I've looked in other episodes about how to handle autistic meltdowns and how to understand anxiety and autism. Basically, the more you're looking at the triggers and what may be occurring. So it could be sound, it could be in an environment where there's just more going on around them, they're processing, and so they ignore the other signals that are coming. Like gaming, as I said before, if, my son's absorbed in a game, he doesn't pay attention to the need that he needs to go to the loo. He's only very young, and that's going to come. The rest of the time he's fine with it. But that's just an example of environmental triggers that can affect these things taking place. For my daughter, environment is a huge thing. If there's too much going on, even if she might be enjoying it, the simple overload of sound, sight, light, chaos, soft play is a great example, all that going on, she'll forget the other important things that she needs. You might find that a lot of kids will overreact to things. So my daughter's a runner, as I said, and part of that is the response of her heart. Her heart will pound, but it could be because there's something in the breathing or something in the feeling of the heart that's giving them a pleasant sensation. So they're doing things which can trigger those behaviors. But seeing those triggers in place, knowing that, hang on, she started running, there's a bigger picture here, can be a real help and a real benefit. Talk to your schools as well. Talk to the Senko in your school if you're experiencing these issues, and pass the information on and get information from them. Ask them how your kids are reacting at school and what's going on there. That information can be really valuable, because it may be that they're not having these issues at school, and it might be because there's such a regulation of time at school. So they're actually having a routine in place in that way. Recess comes, lunchtime comes, and they go to the loo as part of that process. And so they're not having the issues of wetting themselves that we might be experiencing at home, because we don't have quite such a structured routine. Getting these hints and tips back from the school and also relaying it to them so that they can be looking for things as well can really help with things like diagnosis down the track if you're experiencing problems with that. More importantly, it just helps our children. I'm very lucky that my daughter's school are very receptive to a back and forth between us. If I've noticed some behaviours here at home, I let them know. I just email her teacher actually, and she and I can talk about these things, and it makes a real difference for me knowing how to prepare for when she comes home. If she's had a bad day at school, I know it's probably going to be a bad evening at home. Having an email that just says we had some challenges today, here's what happened, helps me to get the truth of the situation, because my daughter's creative, shall we say. Being able to know what's actually happened, and when I'm told one side of the story, I can say, well, did this happen as well? You know that did, don't you? And she's learnt she can't really trick me in that situation, because we talk back and forth, and she knows that I work with the school, not against them, and vice versa. Sadly, so many schools aren't the same. So many teachers aren't the same. I'm not trying to put any of our teachers or schools down. It's just simply something about the knowledge of how autism is, things like masking, and the fact that someone might appear to be perfectly functional at school, is because of a complete lack of understanding of masking, and they're not realising that when they get home there's all these issues taking place. Communication with your school is essential, and from my experience, I don't care if they're annoyed that I'm constantly on at them. I will say, because I want my daughter to have the best experience and the most help that she can get. The biggest piece of advice I can give is to talk to other families, other autistic people, other people with sensory processing disorder, other people who are facing these issues, and get the information that you can from them. I run a group on Facebook for parents of autistic kids. I talk about it quite a bit because it's a big part of my life. But one of the great things there is that if people have a question, if there's something they don't understand, they can pop it up, and we've got autistic people and parents of autistic people who are there to respond and share information and ideas and solutions that have worked for them. Talking to autistic people and getting the perspective from the inside has made such a difference in how I can support my daughter. I understand so much more about her than I would be able to had I not had the advice from autistic people given to me that I can then understand and relate these things back. Seek out other people, seek out other families, seek out autistic people. Go into groups that are going to help you with that. Use Twitter, Facebook, whatever options are there to you. There's great charities like Scope who have local groups where you can meet other parents who are going through the same sort of things. There are loads of options out there, so please get as much information as you can. Information is power when it comes to these sorts of things. The other thing I would add is it's a sad reality that in schools bullying is a problem. And it's a problem that's never really going to go away. We can do everything we can to prevent it, but it still happens. And we're seeing it more and more with increased exposure of social media and cyberbullying and things like that. The sad reality is that often kids who are just perceived as being different become targets for bullying. I really encourage an open communication with your kids to let you know if they're experiencing this. Let them know that they have a safe place in the home where they can say, this is what's happening, because that gives you the power to go and talk to the school, talk to them and reassure them and sort these things out, and hopefully put some strategies in place that will prevent this. It's one of those things that just sucks about having kids with a neurodiverse brain. We seem to target anything that's different as human beings, and we live in a society now that's getting a lot better with that, but it's pretty obvious when you look at a lot of the hashtags that are out there, it's no way near perfect, and it needs a lot of work to be done. We can help our kids with hopefully not being bullied in these situations simply by being proactive, talking with the school and making sure that these things are impacting their lives as little as possible. The other thing to do is look at charities that are around. As I said, Scope and autism.org.uk, the National Autistic Society, have been tremendous helps to us with advice. So if there's something I don't understand and I'm finding it difficult to get information or get straight information, if you like, about it, they're a really good resource and they are there to help. That's why these charities have been set up. Use them, that's what they're there for. There's plenty of other information I've got on my channel. There are other channels out there on YouTube and podcasts on Apple, iTunes and all that kind of stuff, which are really good. Make the use of that information, read the articles that are out there. As I say, information is power. The more you know, the more you're going to be able to help and support your child. And I highly recommend it. It's made a huge difference in my own life. That's pretty much all I want to say on Interception. I'd love to hear your experiences. If you've experienced Interception, if you have social processing disorder or you're autistic yourself and you've experienced these issues, please pop a comment in. I'd love to hear from you. I'd love to do another episode on this down the track as I learn more myself. Your information really does help with that. If you've got kids and you're struggling with this, let me know. I'll see if I can put you in touch with the right people to get more information on it. Please do like this video. It does help to get the word out there. The whole purpose of this is to help destigmatize, get acceptance and understanding about autism out there. The more you like, the more people who subscribe to this channel, the wider reception it's going to get, and that's really what all this is about for me. Stay safe. I hope everyone's well, and I will see you next time.